Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. This is Kim Greenhouse. I'm so delighted today to have the chairman of Gold Money, James Turk, here today. He's the founder of Gold Money. He's considered the Yoda of metals. He has probably one of the most intricate, important understandings of the role of money today, and really understands money as it's been used throughout human history. When most of us are confused, James Turk is clear, and he is the author of The Money Bubble, a brand new book called The Money Bubble, What to Do Before It Pops, that he wrote with John Rubino. He had previously written, along with John Rubino, The Coming Crash of the Dollar. We're here today to distinguish some things that even need more distinguishing after the first two interviews we did with him via audio. He is in London. He's in a big change in his life. And we're here to talk about what we can do that's not so obvious to most of us, including money managers, traders, accountants, investors, people that are concerned about holding their purchasing power. He talks about how trust can erode the purchasing power of the dollar. He talks about something important called a crack-up boom that's in his new book he's going to explain to us. He's also talked about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and we've done some work about Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies with some visionaries. We had Reggie Middleton on, we had Andrea Antonopoulos on, and James is going to talk about the role of cryptocurrencies and also inflation and hyperinflation, which most of us get confused, and most of us don't believe that we're going to experience hyperinflation. History, in fact, does repeat itself. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome the Yoda of Metals, the founder of Gold Money, James Turk. Welcome to It's Rainmaking Time.
Thank you, Kim. It's really great to be with you today.
Let's talk a little bit about the money bubble. You seemed way more bold in this book, way more willing to call a spade, meaning you've always been honest, but you seem to have, like, you're pulling out all the stops, both you and John Rubino, and you're really naming names of what things are and what we need to pay attention to. Did something change in you as a steward in the financial industry from the coming collapse of the dollar to the money bubble? What happened to you that you're able to distill things and call names of who is doing what and what it really is?
Well, I think it's really been just the passage of time. The coming collapse of the dollar came out in 2004. And in that book, John and I had two basic themes. One is to buy gold because it was good value and in fact undervalued. And secondly, to bet against the housing bubble, shorting stocks, shorting things like Fannie Mae, and et cetera. And we expected an event like 2008. But the outcome that occurred in 2008 isn't quite what we thought. We thought that the financial system would implode because of all of the speculative positions that had been taken, because of all of the debt that had been accumulated. The debt really couldn't be serviced. But in fact, what happened is that at the last minute, the system was kept together by this unprecedented amount of money printing that the Fed has done over the past few years. So, looking over the past couple of years since 2008, back in 2013, when the gold price started falling earlier in the year, I basically stepped back and reevaluated all of the core ideas in the book, all of my core premises as to why I think we're in a long-term bull market that's going to continue. And John and I started speaking about it, and we thought, well, okay, this is a good opportunity to do another book, bring the people up to date as to where the situation is financially, what the monetary system looks like, and why 2008 didn't quite bring about the collapse of fiat currency as we expected when we wrote The Coming Collapse of the Dollar 10 years ago. So what we've done is we've written this book called The Money Bubble. It's got a lot more information that didn't appear in the first book, and obviously everything is up to date. We did it mainly in the last 4 months of last year. The hard copy came out in January of this year, so it was really quite a quick process to get the book from our heads into paper.
You talk about the distinction as a core distinction between financial assets and tangible assets. And most of us think, well, that's obvious. We know what that is. But we don't really operate like we know what it is. And if we did, most of us wouldn't be so invested in financial assets. And my question to you is, aren't banks really carriers and investors in mostly financial assets on the back end? So when we think we're visiting on the retail end, in fact, we're not at the same bank, are we?
Yeah, banks really aren't what banks used to be. Banks have basically become, hedge funds. And I'm referring here to the large money center banks, not necessarily the community bank that you have down the street, which still is providing banking in a traditional way. But the big banks have become hedge funds. And the point you're making about financial assets and tangible assets is important because wealth comes in these two different forms. Tangible assets are, of course, things like houses, farmland, timberland, mines, oil wells, factories. And then financial assets are promises of one sort or another. And all of these promises have counterparty risk. It's the risk that the promise from the person who's making that promise cannot be fulfilled. Or they don't have the financial capacity to fulfill it. And you have to distinguish between financial real wealth and financial assets because during we have operating in our economy what's called the boom-bust cycle. In the 1920s you had the boom, 1930s you had the bust, 50s and 60s you had the boom, 70s you had the bust, 80s and 90s you had the boom. And since the collapse of the dot-com bubble back in 2000, we've basically been in the bust. And this bust still has a way to go. But when you're in a bust, in order to manage your portfolio properly, you should be focusing on real wealth, tangible assets of all sorts, and avoiding financial assets because a lot of promises are broken, as we saw in 2008, and as we're likely to see again in the not-too-distant future, probably within a year or two, I would think at the latest, a repeat of 2008. So, to protect yourself during the bust, you want to be focused on real assets. During the boom, yes, it's okay to accept other people's promises because during the boom times, as money is being printed by the central bank and the commercial banks, you have these illusions of prosperity that all is well and the boom is never going to end. But this is a function of fractional reserve banking of the banking system, where they continue to lend and lend and lend until the banks become over-leveraged, borrowers become over-leveraged, and you have the bust. That's what happened in 2000, and we're right at that situation again. That there's too much debt in the system. It's only being serviced because interest rates are at or near zero. But what that's doing is it's breaking the back of our capitalist system because savings and the accumulation of capital through savings is an important component of it. And that's not occurring because of the zero interest rate policy of the Federal Reserve.
Why is Warren Buffett downplaying the importance and the role of gold?
That's a good question. I've written about it. Obviously, he knows what his father had said, that there's a role to play, an important role that gold plays in the society. In fact, there was a speech by Howard Buffett, who was a representative from Omaha for 4 terms in Congress. He gave the speech back in 1947, and he noted in that speech how gold had been confiscated by Mussolini in Italy, Lenin in Russia, and Hitler in Germany. He didn't say that it had been confiscated by Roosevelt as well in the United States. Obviously, he was being polite. But in that speech, he made the point that, gold and a free society and sound money are very much dependent upon one another, because if you have money that can be created out of thin air, which is what governments do, they will use that money in ways that is not necessarily what the people want. And a good example of that is in 2008, during the financial collapse, and the proposal for the bailouts were made. 80% of the American population knew that was a wrong solution, but because they could not control the monetary system and they couldn't control their representatives through the voting system, as Howard Buffett explained in his speech, the bailouts were made against the will of the American people. So in order to have a proper relationship, and this is again Howard Buffett, in order to have a proper relationship between the people and the government, you have to have sound money where people control the money, and we don't have that anymore. Now, why Warren Buffett has gone, in a way, or he's ignored the teachings of his father, I really don't know.
But he wields a lot of power. People listen to him. And what's interesting, sorry to cut you off, but it just seems strange to me that people look to him for financial guidance and wisdom and you know, somebody, quote, in the know. Why would he underplay the critical nature of sound money? I don't get it. I don't get it. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I don't get it either. But, you know, even more critical, by telling everybody to invest in stocks for the long term, he's ignoring an important point that his father focused on, that in our society, there's a difference between investing and saving. You know, investing is taking your hard-earned capital and putting it at risk in some kind of an investment, be they shares in a company or whatever. But savings is the accumulation of capital itself. And in a capitalist society, this accumulation of savings is an important component. You know, it's the middle class that provides the balance of the savings, or the bulk of the savings, and the bulk of the labor in order to make the capitalist society work. And it works in a way that everybody's standard of living is raised. And, you know, we've moved away from that, and, you know, that's why you get these complaints about the 1% on Wall Street. You know, they're benefiting from everything, but Main Street is not benefiting. And I think this is true, because if you look at the economy is still doing terribly. Wall Street's been bailed out, but there are less people working in the States today than there were back in 2007. So until you get a growth in employment, you're going to have a poor economy, because after all, the economy is people working, saving money, and spending, you know, what they don't save. And that's today. That formula of a basic capitalist society is being disrupted by the extensive government intervention we're seeing at all levels, at the federal government and through the Federal Reserve.
When you think about the fact that we've been in a debt-based system for, over 50 years, and we're in a liability-based system that we are relating to as money, it, to me, is part of the reason that most of us don't look at gold or the accumulation of gold as something that's so important that it is its own savings account. In other words, it's a capital accumulator. It's something that allows us to retain our purchasing power. But purchasing power, for some reason, is not translated in the schools in economics. Otherwise, don't you think that our financial analysts, our financial teachers, our mentors, our advisors would be advising clients that not only is the number that is accumulated important, but the purchasing power that flows with the numbers? Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree 100%. You know, in order to accumulate wealth, you have to actually, to measure that accumulation of wealth, it's the purchasing power of money, or these units of wealth that you need to use in order to determine, you know, whether you're becoming more wealthy. And the problem with currency today is the purchasing power is constantly changing. It's trying to, you know, measure, as the saying goes, a piece of cloth with a ruler that's constantly getting shorter and shorter. It just doesn't work.
When people look at gold, at buying and accumulating gold, because of the confiscation in the United States, a lot of people are reluctant to have it. Other people say, don't put gold in a storage facility. Don't put it offshore out of the United States. You may never be able to get a hold of it. And a lot of people have very passionate feelings about both. One is, it's not near me. The metals aren't near me, therefore I don't have control of them. But what a lot of people forget is the confiscation of the United States, where the gold was taken. And so one part is a psychological thing, which is, it's not near me. My bank's near me. You know, the money's near me, but it's not our money. There's capital controls happening on the banks, and the reality is we're not really working with anything but a debt-based, liability-based system that's out of control. So what do we have? What does it mean when my bank, Chase, tells me I can't move my money out of the bank past a certain point? Is it my money? Whose money is it? And in fact, what I'm referring to is, it's not even money. So what is it?
Yeah, you've actually raised a number of good points, and a couple of actually questions are in there need to, I think, be answered. You know, first of all, you're talking about gold, and it does invoke an emotional response in people. You know, why this is so, I'm not really sure, but, you know, obviously it has something to do with human nature, and also, you know, what people read through the mainstream media as to what gold is. But up from the creation of the Constitution and the Coinage Act of 1792 up through 1971, gold and silver were the backbone of our monetary system, of the American monetary system, and it worked very well. There were problems with the fractional reserve nature of the banks that caused the booms and busts, but the booms and busts back then weren't as bad as what we've experienced since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, and then the elimination of any link to gold and the discipline that gold imposes on governments when that link was broken in 1971. So we're in a system that, where gold has been money throughout the world for 5,000 years, and 40 years we've been in this experiment where money is being printed out of thin air, as you call it, a liability type money, because it's all based on someone's promise. It's based on the promise of the Federal Reserve. It's based on the promise of the government to try to, they say maintain the purchasing power of the dollar, but it only takes a penny of a 1913 dollar to purchase what a 2014 dollar purchases today. The dollar has lost so much purchasing power over the last 100 years since the Federal Reserve was created. So, yeah, it's really a tough question, Kim, but basically what we have to do when it comes to portfolio management and preparing for an uncertain and unpredictable future is to do what we need to do to sleep well at night. And generally, history shows that you have to have a portion of your portfolio in gold and silver because they do preserve purchasing power over long periods of time. I like to use the example that I remember as a young boy in the 1950s growing up in Ohio, my parents could drive into the local gas station, fill up the family car with $2 silver. Today, the silver content of $2 silver can still fill up the family car, but $2 doesn't even come close to to doing that. So you look at the precious metals as a way of preserving purchasing power over long periods of time. They basically are money. They've been money for thousands of years. They're going to remain money, I suspect, for the foreseeable future. I
like your analogy where you say when people have a perception about metals, it's metals are manipulated too, and metals are an investment, and gold is down now, or silver's down now. What should I do? It's still manipulated. I don't want to be involved. And I like your response, which has been consistent as I've listened to interviews with you, which is it depends. Are you looking from the boat that's going up and down with the waves, or are you looking from the land? And that gestalt is very instructive. Yeah, but is it the real answer? Is it the real answer?
Yeah, it is. The land, of course, is the gold, and the boat is the fiat currency. And you think that you're trying to calculate things properly when you're in the boat, but in reality you're not. You have to make that adjustment, and it's not necessarily easy to do because we're taught, the wrong way. And you're going against conventional wisdom and conventional thinking when you go the right way. But all you have to do is look at logic and history to conclude that this system today is gone on the wrong track. But intuitively, I think that people understand that because the surveys and the polls tend to show that there's a sense of unease in America today. That most Americans are basically saying that the country is headed in the wrong direction. And I think there's a great level of frustration about that. And so you see, one year the Democrats come in, next year the Republicans come in, then the Democrats again. But it's the same old stuff. I think Ron Paul was a breath of fresh air that sort of enabled people to think, yeah, this is the way it used to be, and maybe we should be heading back in that direction. But the vested interests now are such that Ron Paul was marginalized, and it's very difficult to turn the ship of state around and put it back into the right direction.
We're going to go to a quick break, and we'll be right back with James Turk from Gold Money. As it's probably clear to most of you, if we're really talking about banking and economics, you have to look at central banking, because it's through central banking in which everything ticks, everything moves. It is like the molecular structure of banking and economics. And very much like it's the molecular structure of banking and economics which runs and operates everything connected to the economy, so is it true that the cell contains the action of hydration in the body. We're at a time when water is so important. We have billions of people on Earth. We have water shortages all over the earth. And most of us are walking around chronically dehydrated. There's good reason for this. It has to do with the fact that our water has been adulterated. It's been changed at a molecular level, running through copper pipes. Also, so many chemicals have been put in the water that the molecular structure is different. And this directly affects our ability to hydrate. Sometimes it doesn't matter how much water you drink. You can drink 10 glasses, 12 glasses of water, and we're still dehydrated. It is because most of the water we're drinking has been changed at a molecular level and can't get through the cell membrane, or what's called the aquaporin channel. This should matter to you very much like central banking should matter to you if you want to really have a state change in the economic paradigm and economic world. Well, chemistry cannot manipulate, this is important new knowledge, the bonding angle between hydrogen and oxygen in the H2O molecule. It takes physics to do this. And when this is successfully accomplished, the water will recreate itself into a different particle with a different geometry. So basically, the hydrogen bonding angle of water makes a huge difference in terms of whether or not we can get hydrated. And you can't do this through regular chemistry. Well, theoretical physicist Dan Nelson, the founder of the positron group and the owner of Wayback Water, is bringing us Wayback Water, a homeopathic dose of water that we add 1 tablespoonful of this water to a gallon of water, and it totally hydrates the body. It enters the aquaporin channel and does something that most extracellular water cannot do. The thing is, we have to do something with the water to get it small enough at a particle level to enter our cells. And the cells are where the action is for hydration. Remember, as we're listening to James Turk talk about gold money and the economic system and banking and what's really happening, it's all in the context of a centralized banking system or decentralized system. Very similarly, that is true when we're talking about the cell hydration capability. I want you to go to waybackwater.com. I want you to check into Dan Nelson's work and call Nancy Ainsley at 870-741-5877. Get yourself some Wayback Water. Learn about hydration. Learn about how important the cell is and that we're electrical beings and that the water also must be very high energy water to hydrate us. Thank you very much. Welcome back to the show, and we are here with James Turk, the founder of Gold Money and the author of a new book, The Money Bubble, What to Do Before It Pops, that he wrote with John Rubino. James, I want you to talk to the audience, even though you've written about it, about the Havenstein Moment and why the Havenstein Moment is so important, this example, this decision point that we're all at now, and why you say it's coming.
Yeah. Rudolf Havenstein was the head of the Reichsbank, which was the central bank in Germany in the 1920s. And he was the guy who presided over the German hyperinflation. You know, we've all seen these pictures of people moving wheelbarrows around of paper money, where the currency was ultimately destroyed, and the middle class of Germany was ultimately destroyed because savings were destroyed. What happens is, and let's say what happened in Germany, and we've seen this in other places, in other countries as well, because the Havenstein moment has repeated many, many times, because many currencies have been destroyed over the last 100 years. They've been destroyed by government and central bank actions. What the Havenstein moment is he decided that it was necessary to keep printing money in order to keep what he thought the economy going, and to keep the government from going bust. But what he didn't understand is that money is a function of supply and demand. And they're two, just like any other good or service as a function of supply and demand, money does too. We tend to ignore the demand for money and talk about only the supply. And this is what the central banks talk about when they say M1, M2, or M3, the total quantity of dollars outstanding or the total quantity of euros outstanding. But the demand for the currency is just as important as the supply, and in many respects, it's even more important. What a Havenstein moment is that regardless what the central bank is doing, whether they're printing too much or not, a Havenstein moment occurs when the demand for the currency starts falling. And my view is that I think we've already seen the Havenstein moment for the dollar in the sense that the super rich get it. If you look at what's going on in the collectibles market, if you look at antique cars, if you look at real estate in places considered to be safe havens, like here in London or perhaps Singapore, prices are going through the roof. The super rich are dumping their dollars and their euros and yen, because this is a problem that's affecting all the currencies of the world, and they're going into things. They're moving out of financial assets and they're going into things. They're moving out of paper money. They're moving out of currencies and going into things because they recognize it's better to own a work of art than it is to have $1 million sitting in a bank account, because the dollar is on this, it's on this path to destruction. So what's happened here is that the Havenstein moment, I think, has already occurred. The demand for the dollar is falling, but it's not yet hit the middle class. The hyperinflation and the currency collapse occurs when everybody gets it, not just the super rich. And I think that when everybody gets it is going to happen in the not too distant future, because all of this money printing, not just by the Fed, but by all of the central banks around the world, is no different than what Havenstein was doing. The currency appears differently. It appears as units of account in a bank account rather than paper currency circulating in commerce. So it appears differently, but it's basically the same thing. And instead of calling it money printing, today central bankers call it quantitative easing.
That's a very long, elaborate thing for such a fraudulent body of work, isn't it? Sounds so clinical.
Yeah, they're very creative in coming up with things that make it sound good and causes people to be misled instead of looking at really what the process is involving. They think, oh, okay, these guys know what they're doing. But the reality is what they're doing is they're serving their own interests. We saw, again, I keep going back to the bailout in 2008. They're serving their own interests. They bailed themselves out. Instead of what should happen in a capitalist society, Joseph Schumpeter, the great Austrian economist, came up with the term creative destruction. You make decisions, and if the decisions are a good decision, you prosper. If you make the wrong decision, you ultimately should go bankrupt. What happened in 2008 is we saw that Ford Motor had made the right decisions, and they didn't need a bailout. But instead of General Motors, which made the bad decisions, failing, it was bailed out by the government. And, so again, it's an example of how the capitalist system is being destroyed. The focus is on status quo rather than growth and development and new wealth creation.
You say on page 63 of your book, the face value of all derivatives outstanding in 2013 was about $693 trillion, or near 10 times the size of the entire global economy. You then say the total number of derivatives is still growing, so it's soaring. And so to give a sense of the magnitude of this, you say that Deutsche Bank, for example, has 20 times the size of the German economy of derivatives. Mm-hmm. So if this is a function, it's a destructive mechanism that we know is responsible for the entire instability of the banking system and the economy, what does this mean if a bank like Deutsche Bank and other banks are this heavily loaded in derivatives?
Yeah, it's a source of instability and fragility in the financial system by the big banks, which, as I've said, are really no longer banks. They've really become hedge funds. They're playing not only with their capital, but they're playing with other people's money as well, which is, all of the money that people have on deposit in this banking system. And that's really what the problem was. We saw in 2008, when Lehman Brothers went under, how important the counterparty risks were. Some of the banks that relied on Lehman's promises instead of making the right decision and not getting involved with them, accepted Lehman's promise. When Lehman went under, they were owed billions and billions of dollars that Lehman didn't have. And as a consequence, this had a knock-on effect. But again, they papered it over. They haven't addressed the problem. And what's worse, not only have they not addressed the problem, they've increased the level of debt so that even though interest rates are now near zero and economic activity is no greater than it was back in 2007, they've increased the level of debt, so the burden is even greater. So the next time we have another Lehman event, which again is inevitable in the way the system is structured, it's going to be even worse than it was in 2008.
James, you don't believe that the fake debt, is ever going to be paid, do you?
No. What will happen is that the currency will be destroyed instead, just like it was in Weimar Germany, just like it was in Argentina a few years ago, and is presently occurring again in Argentina, like it was in Zimbabwe, like it was in dozens and dozens of countries where the government had made too many promises, more than it could fulfill. And I guess this is an important thing that maybe should explain in a little bit greater detail. When the government has control of the monetary process and there's no discipline imposed on government, which is what we're losing by no longer tying the money creation process to the quantity of gold that's being produced and accumulated, is that a government will tend to keep spending and spending and borrowing, and eventually it reaches a stage where it's spending more money, causing it to borrow more than the market is willing to lend to it, or more than the market can lend to it, because the borrowing is greater than the total amount of savings. And what the government at that stage does, instead of cutting back its spending, it turns to the central bank and says, buy my debt and turn it into currency. And this was what happened in America during and after the War of Independence. The first currency of the country was the Continental. The government continued to print the Continental until eventually it was totally destroyed. And one of the reasons why the framers created a more perfect union is they recognized the problems that occurred by having a government without any restrictions on its ability to create money. So in the Constitution itself, and then confirmed by the Coinage Act of 1792, which was signed into law by George Washington, gold and silver were a key part of the monetary system, and it was until 1971. So the system that we see today is no different than the system that existed in the early 1780s, and the system that caused the framers of the Constitution to ultimately, form the Constitution and change the nature of the federal government from the Continental Congress to the Republic, which they created.
And yet it's even more complex. You write about that on page 145. You say, a complex system like a weather front, a living organism, or pre-avalanche snow-covered mountainside contains numerous parts that do change in response to their communication and interaction. This process can create feedback loops begetting emergent properties that differ radically from the system's constituent parts or its previous state. So, and then you give an example. Think of a tropical depression becoming a Cat 5 hurricane overnight, and you have a sense of the power and potential instability of a complex system. There is something interesting to me about the fact that there is this perception, it's an energetic perception, that nothing will happen to our dollar here. Is it national pride? Is it denial? Is it complete ignorance? What is it?
It's probably those and other things that we can't even imagine. But I think it's driven by this blind faith in government that's developed over the past several decades. I've seen it. I'm in my mid-60s, and I've seen it develop over my lifetime. That people just have this mythical, misguided, in my view, blind faith that government's always going to do the right thing, but they don't. Government is run by human beings. Human beings are by nature limited and make mistakes. I mean, no one is perfect. And I think this point about the complex society, it's really just the interaction of millions and millions of people in economic activity, going about our daily lives as we seek to, improve our situation in life and make certain that, our futures are okay and that of our children will be okay. But it also makes the point that central planning is a failed activity. And we know that from the Soviet Union. We saw what a disaster the Soviet Union was, central planning just doesn't work. It's impossible to expect that a few guys sitting around a Politburo table can make decisions for individuals choosing to make decisions for how they want to live their lives. And the Federal Reserve sitting around its table is no different from the Soviet Politburo. It's ridiculous to think that central planners in government can know better for you and me and each individual than we ourselves know. So by controlling money and controlling the economy, they are in effect controlling each and every one of us.
I want to talk.
I should say, Kim, trying to, because at the end of the day, human nature will win out, and we'll do what we want to do, regardless of what the government says you need to do. And that's what free markets are all about, or what governments will call black markets. But it's basically individuals voluntarily cooperating with one another. No force involved, as is always the case when governments are involved. It's just individuals voluntarily cooperating with one another to improve their situation in life, as they go into the marketplace to fulfill their needs and wants.
I relate to you in a particular way when you say you're retired. The thing is, I don't feel you're retired. You're about as retired as the ocean. You are not retired. There's no way someone with that mind and that spirit is retired. So I have a question for you about Germany and the gold that Germany never got back. We talked about this before in our earlier conversation. Here's the thing. If gold is so peripheralized to the American people, why do our banks hoard it and not give it back to the German people?
Yeah, that's really a good question. And it should make everyone think. Why has the U.S. encouraged other countries to sell their gold, but why has the U.S. supposedly never sold any of its gold? Since the last attempt to control the gold price back in the 1960s. I guess there's a bigger question that we have to ask ourselves here, Kim. Is the gold really there? If the gold was really there, why don't they deliver the gold that supposedly they're holding for Germany instead of keeping it? They might be keeping it because they think possession is 9/10 of the law, and they don't want to give this gold away, even if it's German gold, in case they need it to reconstruct the U.S. monetary system when the money bubble blows up. But one would think that if the gold was there, they should return it to Germany anyway. So there's the possibility that the gold isn't there. I mean, it's just another indication of how things have changed.
But have they really? Have they really changed, or are we just in the exponentiated expression of what started when the Federal Reserve came in? Aren't we in the full-blown expression of it? I mean, criminality is criminality. Seizure is seizure. They seized the country. They actually created a fake form of money. They confiscated gold. They took over the system. They centralized banking. And then on the back end of the banks, they have this financial fraud, financial terrorism going on. And one of the things I thought was interesting also in your book is you acknowledged nobody goes to jail. So we know this thing is rogue. It's rogue. The writing's on the wall. We're in a rogue system. So in a rogue system, anything goes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And you're absolutely right. I was going to say that it's changed compared to what existed under the classical gold standard that was in place up until the beginning of the First World War. Under the classical gold standard, there was a rule of law that neither government nor politicians nor individuals were any different. There was a level playing field that everybody was judged by the same rules, the same laws. That's gone. There's no longer a level playing field. The playing field has been tilted by the government in its favor to the disadvantage of the individuals. And, that's hurtful to the individuals. It's hurtful to them to individuals who want to live their life, as free individuals. But, what we saw in the 20th century was a century of fascism. And, I go back to the gold confiscation issue again. Lenin confiscated gold, Mussolini confiscated gold, Hitler confiscated gold, Roosevelt confiscated gold. Now, it may seem strange to throw those four politicians together and group in one, but they all had the same incentive. They all had the same objective. They all wanted to increase the power of the state and take the power away from the individual. And the way to do that is you confiscate the gold, because gold is really what controls government. It's not vote. It's a sound money system that can really control government. This is the point of the Howard Buffett speech back in 1947.
We're going to go to a quick commercial, and we'll be right back with James Turk, the founder of Gold Money and the author of the book, The Money Bubble, What to Do Before It Pops. Stand by. I can present anything. I don't care what it is. I can contextualize what you've got. I can introduce what you've got. I can open the space for what you have. I can create receptivity in an audience. And I can introduce whatever it is that's important to you. Whoever you are, a great steward in your industry, doing something very important that has to get done. If you need the space opened up, if you need people to get what you're doing very quickly, if you need a context created in which to introduce something, if you need any kind of introductory work and offerings, I'd like to make myself available to those of you who are great stewards. You either have a great company, a great product, a great service offering, an important piece of new knowledge that you need introduced, whether it's being introduced on a website to an audience of 10,000 people, to an audience of 100,000 people, whether it's on television, whether it's on radio, it doesn't matter. I'm opening up the space and letting you all know that if you would like me to introduce you or your body of work, feel free to call me at 626-398-8652. I'm Kim Greenhouse, and I can introduce what you've got. Thank you very much. Welcome back to It's Rainmaking Time. We're here with James Turk. And James, I want to talk to you about your involvement with cryptocurrency, why you're in it, why you are now an advocate of cryptocurrency. I'm in shock when I heard you talk to Max Kaiser about this transition mentally and energetically into this platform. We did a piece on Bitcoin with 4 Bitcoin stars, and we want to hear why is James Turk turned?
Yeah, well, it's not that I don't like gold anymore or anything like that. I just look at cryptocurrencies as a technological innovation. You know, I like to distinguish between money and currency. I view them as something different. Money is a mental tool that we use for economic calculation. Currency is what we actually use when we go into the marketplace to buy goods and services. And if you look at the history of currency, it evolves. It becomes more efficient. And that's a good thing, because if you can eliminate the impediments or the costs of transacting with one another, that creates more opportunities for commerce. And that's a good thing, because the more opportunities for commerce we have, the more opportunities for people to work and raise everyone's standards of living. So over time, currencies have evolved. They evolved from just weights of metal to coins with milled edges, so you can see whether a currency is clipped or not. Another technological innovation was paper currency, which circulated more easily and efficiently than large weights of metal. Then you had checking accounts, then you had wire transfers. Then in the 1950s, you had plastic cards, which enabled the currency to circulate through pieces of plastic. Then you had, what we've done in Gold Money, digital gold currency, and now you've got cryptocurrencies. So I think cryptocurrencies are an important technological innovation, and it'll be interesting to see, what impact they have. But the fact that some governments are starting to outlaw it, it's a recognition by these governments that cryptocurrencies are a threat to their power, because it creates a currency system outside of the control of governments. And instead of being monitored by regulators, which I think is a failed thing anyway, because government regulators, we've had, things like REFCO, MF Global, Lehman Brothers, all these things are heavily regulated, but they fail anyway. And people come back and say, well, we need more regulation. The reality is you need market regulation, and that's what Bitcoin offers. It's regulated by the people who participate in it. It's free market regulation, and that's the best form of regulation at all. And if Bitcoin is ultimately supplanted by another cryptocurrency, again, let the market regulate it by using it or choosing not to use it. That's what I think is good regulation. So cryptocurrencies I think are here to stay. I think they are complementary to precious metals, Just like paper back in the early days was complementary to precious metals in that it was easier to move a large amount of metal around by giving paper instead of actually moving the metal. Similarly with cryptocurrencies. But, so I'm still obviously a gold advocate and believe gold is money. But cryptocurrencies are an opportunity for precious metals to circulate more efficiently, particularly in the way commerce works today. The online environment is so important to commerce. And none of the national currencies circulate efficiently because there's always payment risk associated with it, and there's a lot of expense associated with it. An online merchant who uses a Visa or a MasterCard could end up paying, 3 to 5% of revenue to a card provider, whereas cryptocurrencies are essentially, next to nothing in terms of cost. So if you're an online merchant, I think you should be looking at cryptocurrencies. I really do. I think they are an important technological development with a good future. And I think that's why so many venture capitalists from the Silicon Valley and other places around the world are putting so much money into cryptocurrencies, because they recognize that the existing monetary system comes with a lot of baggage, a lot of costs, and it's not working well. So cryptocurrencies, I think, ultimately are an important development that everybody should be paying attention to.
Okay, so I want to respond to that very elaborate translation for cryptocurrencies. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Your friend and somebody I really love watching, Max Kaiser, calls cryptocurrencies the precious code. Mm-hmm. And if you're looking at the cryptocurrency as money, even though it's currency, then some people may say in their mind, listen, there's nothing backing this thing. It's not, it's not backed by anything. It's not a tangible asset like gold and silver if you're digitizing that and doing business with gold money. And yet, if you're looking at it as a decentralized platform, then a decentralized platform is a kind of a new economic financial space of unregulation. The market dictates what happens, and buyer beware, and people do what they do, but there's a different accountability system. It's kind of like being off the grid. To me, it's like being off the grid. Buyer, in other words, it's a final demand settlement, what's going on in cryptocurrency. I buy something from you, we have instructions how it's going to be delivered, and then there's got to be some protocol if it's not what you say it is, etc. Reggie Middleton is working on the contractual side for cryptocurrencies out of New York from the Boom Bust blog. I don't know if you're aware of the detailed work he's doing with the cryptocurrencies. He's working on it with Bitcoin, but I think he's adding value to that system that can also be replicated. And I know that you have a cryptocurrency, or Gold Money has developed a cryptocurrency, which I'd like to hear about for a moment. If you feel you can talk about it right now, we'd like to know a little bit about the cryptocurrency and when it might be available to us. Is it 2014, you think, or 2015?
Yeah, it's already launched. The company is called Netagio, Netagio. .com, and it's already launched. It's right now just taking some very early steps. It has plans to begin expanding in a number of important ways, and you'll see those developments over the course of the year. But I want to respond to one thing that you were saying.
Sure.
That cryptocurrencies are people think that they're not backed by anything. But what is the dollar backed by? The dollar's backed by promises of politicians and central planners, whereas the cryptocurrencies are backed by a mathematical algorithm that cannot be broken by known technology. Personally, I'd rather rely on mathematics than the promises of politicians.
I like that answer. I think that some people, when people have become advocates of metals, it's very hard psychologically to say, and we're going to be adding this. This is another participant in this economic system. So I guess there's a lot of distrust, in the marketplace and with consumers. People are very distrustful. And so when it comes to anything crypto, some say, it's the mark of the beast. It's a devil posing as a sheep or a lamb, and it's not really what we think it is. But I'm very interested in it, and I'm very interested in cryptocurrencies as a decentralized economic platform in which we can use whatever currencies we want, whether it's a euro or a pound sterling or the U.S. Federal Reserve note. I don't even like to call it a dollar because it's not. It's a U.S.
Yes.
Federal Reserve note. Let's call it what it is. It's stamped that way for a reason. Russia, India, and China are the big leaders in gold accumulation. You agree with me?
Yeah, at the moment, that's true.
What do you see coming?
China's going to remain a big factor for some time to come. I mean, they just have so many people, and they're creating so much wealth. There's a basic principle that gold goes to where the wealth's created. And these flows of gold that we're seeing from west to east are going to have profound implications. China is probably in a position, even on its own, but even better position if it chooses to combine with Russia, to create an entirely new monetary system on their own and completely leave the dollar. But I'm not a geopolitical specialist. I really don't know how this is all going to play out or what the repercussions of the Ukraine thing are. But I do know that gold is going to have a role to play for the foreseeable future. It's been that way for 5,000 years, and it's going to continue, I think, for the foreseeable future. And that's why the Chinese are accumulating so much gold. They know that the dollar's, its demise is not too far off. So they've been spending the dollars that they're accumulating and buying real things. They're buying resources in Africa. They're buying, the shares of companies, and they're buying precious metals.
I want you, before we talk about gold being undervalued and the fact that gold has been kind of played down over the years, I want to ask you about the Consumer Price Index. Just if you could speak a couple of minutes about that for the audience. Most people will not believe what you're about to tell them. Yeah,
the numbers are massaged to make the Consumer Price Index look better than it really is. There's a chap by the name of John Williams who runs a company called shadowstats.com, and he calculates inflation the same way the government did back in the late 1970s. And by his measures, if the government had made adjustments to their calculations, the true inflation rate today would be around 9%. I think everybody senses that the cost of living is going up. So when you see a 1.5% number reported by the government, everybody, I think, dismisses that basically anyway. That's a bigger issue here. And as we wrap up, I think we should focus on this, that there's a distrust in institutions that's occurring, and I think that has potentially scary implications for the future. We live and work in a society where people trust one another, where there's confidence in other people's promises, and that's, I think, being called into question by what's happening today at so many different levels. So we focus on this in the book. We explain how in order to make inflation look better, not only is the government massaging numbers, but when you buy a box of cereal today, there's less cereal but the same price. And we use a number of examples of where this has occurred, and this breakdown in trust is, I think, potentially very, very harmful, and it doesn't bode well for the future, which is, to me, somewhat worrying.
I ask friends of mine, if I gave you $500,000 right now, or $700,000 in 10 years, what would you take? And what do you think their answer is?
I'm not sure.
$700,000 in 10 years. And I said, you have made a fatal error. You do not understand inflation, and you don't understand purchasing power and what just happened to the money. Take it now. Yeah. Take the $500,000 right now.
And spend it.
And spend it. And, use it.
Invest it.
Yes.
Buy tangible assets with it. Not necessarily just gold or silver, but buy farmland, buy a house, buy anything that has real wealth, because real wealth is going to continue to hold its value. As long as you buy something that's economic and useful, it will continue to hold its value.
Why is gold undervalued? Give the essence of this. I know it's not an easy thing to explain, but Gata showed us that gold is undervalued. Why, and how do we know that for sure?
Yeah, the GATA.org, the GATA group, they've done a lot of work explaining how governments intervene in the market to keep the gold price low, because by keeping the gold price low, it makes the dollar look like it's a decent currency, when in fact we know that it's not a decent currency. So this government intervention has kept gold undervalued. my own sense, and the mathematical formulas that I show in the book, or that John and I use in the book, are based on historical research and historical numbers. We show the long-term trends as to how reliable these numbers should be. And today, a fair value for gold is about $12,000 an ounce, which sounds a little bit, outrageous, but it's no different than it was back in 1971 when gold was $35 an ounce because of government intervention, keeping it at that low level. And 10 years later, it was $850 an ounce. I think we have a similar move, coming, and it's probably going to be quicker because in the 70s the dollar did not collapse. This time around, I think there's a good possibility that there'll be a wholesale flight out of the dollar. The Havenstein Moment has already been passed, and you're going to end up with a collapse of the currency. It's frightening, and what we as individuals have to do is to recognize it as a real possibility and to prepare for it. And one of the best ways to do that is to own things rather than promises, own assets of value, real assets, intangible assets, rather than financial assets.
I just want to close with this one conversation about Spain. You have a home in Spain, and GoldMoney.com is near Spain, correct, in Jersey?
No, GoldMoney's in the Channel Islands. It's part of the United Kingdom.
Isn't it in Jersey?
Yeah, the island of Jersey.
Okay.
It's Old Jersey.
Old Jersey. Not New Jersey, Old Jersey. Yes, the oldest Jersey.
Yeah, exactly.
I want you to say something about your feeling about what happened with Spain, that the largest pension fund was looted and the Social Security reserve funds bought out government bonds there. What does that mean? What's the implications for the country of Spain?
Yeah. Well, Spain is turning into a basket case. It's instead of doing what it needs to do to operate independently as a sovereign state, its masters in Brussels are telling Spain what to do, which is really unfortunate. It's got 27% unemployment rate. It's got a 52% youth unemployment rate. The economy is just doing horribly. And what they did is they still doing the same, policy that they don't recognize as no longer viable. Spend and borrow, and promises. Politicians make promises they cannot possibly fulfill. So they ran out of borrowing capacity. What they did is they looted the state pension funds. So the state employees are now at risk. Instead of having diversified portfolios, they own Spanish bonds, which I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. But it's not unique to Spain. The same thing happened in Argentina, Ireland, Poland just recently. It basically shows that financial assets are at risk, and people have to diversify their portfolios in a way that they minimize their exposure to promises, minimize their exposure to financial assets.
And this is my last question of the hour, and this is really important. There's so many millions of people that are very afraid that there's a call for a one world centralized system that's run by the EU or run by the powers in the EU. Do you see that happening where there's like this basket of currencies that's used, special drawing rights, or whatever is decided upon to use, that a one world currency will be imposed and or legislated into being on a global level? Are you concerned about it?
Yeah, I am. I think it's a real threat because we've seen where governments control the monetary process, human liberty does not flourish. You want to have sound money. You don't want to have money controlled by bureaucrats and central planners. And the fact that they've imposed so many of these systems around the world and that the powers of central banks are increasing rather than decreasing, it is a worry. It is a worry to me.
Thank you for that honest answer. It's a worry to me, too, and you are in Europe. And have you had any difficulty for gold money in Europe?
Regulatory burdens are becoming more and more burdensome. But we follow the law where we operate in the island of Jersey and in the British Channel Islands, and we will do what we need to do in order to continue following the law. But the financial services industry is becoming more and more under the control of governments, and I think that's probably the wrong way to go.
Do you have a vision for what's next for the world in terms of Natagio, and what does Natagio mean?
It's a combination of net for the internet and agio, which is a term for the foreign exchange trading.
Ooh, very nice. Do you have a vision for Natagio and Gold Money? Parallel systems, but interconnecting?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think they are complementary to one another, as I was explaining before with cryptocurrencies and with precious metals. Cryptocurrencies are a new way to deliver, make a payment. But, gold will always be money. At least it will be money for the foreseeable future.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking with, learning from, and listening to the founder of Gold Money, James Turk. He's also the author of the book, The Coming Collapse of the Dollar, with John Rubino, and the new book, The Money Bubble, What to Do Before It Pops, is out. Please pick up a copy and read it from cover to cover. James, thank you so much for joining us from London. And for those of you who would like to sign up with Gold Money, we have an affiliate code on its Rainmaking Time. Please give us your business and Gold Money your business and go to our affiliate code on its Rainmaking Time and sign up. We do get credit for that. And I really want to support your work, James. I've learned a lot from you, and I really appreciate you and the stewardship and the humility that you have in a very complex and almost obtuse environment in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. It's been great speaking with you.
It's Rainmaking Time. It's Rainmaking Time. Look out, it's Rainmaking Time. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Kim.